Hello from Amsterdam.
Intro?
A city of many museums, such as the Tulip Museum, the Body Museum, the Film Museum, the Sex Museum, Anne Frank Huis, Stedelijk, Rembrandts House, Rijks, Van Gogh Museum. I will be going to the letter 4. I'll explain why I made these choices, what's worth seeing in the museums that I've been to, but also discuss other options and in general tell y'all who this city is for and how to plan a nice weekend trip. The city of Amsterdam is very much braced and prepared for a ton of tourists, and it will be a great weekend or maybe a long-term destination for multiple groups of people. I recommend Amsterdam to, first and foremost, any and all art lovers. Everybody who loves art will find something for themselves there, and they don't really have to be a connoisseur of Dutch art, because these museums, because of their long history, over the years managed to acquire multiple internationally well-renowned artists that I'll talk about later when I'll be talking about the museums that I've chosen in particular in detail. So, art lovers, but also architecture lovers, and crammed together with them, people who enjoy hiking in the cities. Amsterdam is a very monotone when it comes to the terrain. It's very flat. It's just a beautiful city of mainly brick townhouses in multiple colors, crisscrossed with canals. So if you enjoy walking around, you will also find it a joy. Polish people tend to love walking, so me and my brother and our friend had a blast just walking around and visiting. And if you in particular love architecture, it's worth to check out, for example, famously most beautiful townhouses or buildings in general, because there's quite a bit of modern architecture too, and just plan a route around that. Also, of course, it's a very bike-friendly city, so if your preferred mode of sightseeing is by bike, you'll be spoiled for choice here. The infrastructure for bikes is excellent. So, art lovers, city hikers, architecture lovers, and weed smokers. Also, the city is available to be seen via water transport, such as gondolas. I filmed some. But also, I think you can probably rent a kayak and just go kayaking around the city. I've only seen 2 kayaks, but I think it would be dope and very pleasurable to just kayak around the canals. Also, I think people who enjoy just bar hopping and different foods will also get a chance to visit different places, and if you get tips from students, you'll be able to do it on a smaller budget, because Amsterdam city is really expensive. One note though, Amsterdam I wouldn't say is kid-friendly. There isn't anything, well, there are some exhibitions in museums, such as one in Stedelijk, which are prepared in a way to sort of entice kids, but I would not recommend coming here with a kid under the age of 12, because they will just be bored. There's not much for kids here. So let's just get right into the museums. Actually, let's not talk about the museums quite yet. I'll mention why I am filming the rest of the video back from my own place. So I do have a lot of footage from the rest of my trip, but those are just clips of things that I have seen, clips from the museums, but I could not really film a vlog for the reason that I would die. And why was it so unsafe? It's because while the city is excellent for walking, because there is little car traffic, there is a lot of bike traffic. So you can easily navigate it if you're very careful about your surroundings, but I would not be able to just walk around with my selfie stick and the camera. So that's why I am filming from back here. Also, the second day of my trip really tired me on all accounts, and I'll explain and elaborate on that a bit later. But it makes sense to film it from here because it's way calmer and easier for me to focus and just tell you like it is about the museums that I visit. Oh, you're wondering why do I have sandals on my desk? Well, that's because I really wanted metallic sandals, but it's autumn, so I won't get to wear them out, and I wanted to display them. And why am I not wearing them right now? Well, because the internet led me to believe that feet are the boobs of the legs. So the first museum that I visited was the Stedelijk Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. The museum contains works from 19th, 20th, and also a little bit of the 21st century. It has a small-ish displayed permanent collection, which I will mention later, and also a lot of temporary exhibitions. The biggest temporary exhibition is a retrospective of Bruce Nauman. I was not familiar with his work before, and because of his exhibition there is a surcharge on the ticket, so you have to pay €3 more even if you don't want to go and visit that exhibition. But it's just €3, and I do recommend you go if you're interested in art. In general, he's an artist who works in different types of media. Like, he works a lot with neon, which is always a blast to watch. He does some photography and some sculpture as well, not in a traditional single piece of sculpture sense, but more so just exhibiting several objects as one sculpture, which is very common in contemporary art. There was this carousel of different animal casts just spinning around, and also a theme with his work is that he doesn't really want to give you any sort of directions on how to interpret it. You're free to do it yourself. But my favorite works of his were ones made in video, and I think video is his favorite medium, possibly. He films himself a lot in his studio, and I really enjoyed one where he filmed himself walking in the contrapost pose. Contrapost, I don't know. Contrapost is a pose most associated with Greek and Roman sculpture, where the sculptors used to just pose their sculptures in this specific pose to give them more movement, to make them more dynamic. And he filmed himself walking in this pose, and I am doing it with him. There were also different types of video performances in which he later added to them by interacting with the recorded works, and I also wanted to add something to them, so here you go, me being an artist. But apart from that, there was also a very big exhibition of Dutch design, which is excellent. Most of it was from the 60s. This is a yerba mate Polish drink with the rainbow theme because some money from it goes to the gays. I'll allude to this later. And the rooms in which the furniture was displayed were organized by a theme. So, for example, there was one where Dutch design was exhibited along Scandinavian design, which inspired it. There was also a room, for example, with models of houses, and most of them were not, I think, built. They were just models. One of it was inspired by the works of Piet Mondrian, and I'm putting a pin in this surname. And because of this house's shape and colors being inspired by this artist, this very rich museum could afford to hang a work by Piet Mondrian by the glass case with this model. That was very cool. There was also, for example, a room whose theme was new at the time materials, where the furniture was displayed alongside its contemporary artworks, all of them made with plastic and other modern at the time materials. Very good if you ever have a chance to try it. There was also an exhibition of works by Black artists. Some of them were American, but I think most of them were either Dutch or immigrants from Africa to the Netherlands. There were no works by African artists living and working there because
the themes of displacement and experience of Black people in predominantly non-Black countries was a theme within this particular exhibition. And I'll wrap up these temporary exhibitions with just mentioning how well organized they were within the space of the museum, not only because of the corresponding works. Just moving from room to room was a very nice experience because there was a very cohesive transition. A very good example of that was one point of entry into the Black Power exhibition was through a room with a couple of feminist works by non-Black artists, and from that you transition into a room where the works by Black female artists were displayed. So it was a very cool transition. There was not a clearly marked route on the floor, but the museum is just organized in a way where it's pretty obvious how to move inside it. What my one gripe would be that in the rooms where there are multiple art pieces, like spatial art pieces, sculptures, they don't really put a plaque on the work or by the work. They put multiple plaques with explanations side by side on a wall, and then you have to find the work it corresponds to, so that's not great. But still, that's the best organized museum I've seen, I think. And also, just to wrap things up, if you're not a very big art snob, but you want to go to one art museum, I'd say go to Stedelijk. Why? Because its permanent collection, which is in the basement, is a very nice cross-section of different, very famous modern artists. You can see some Van Gogh, you can see some Kandinsky, you can see some Piet Mondrian, and in general, I think two themes that transcend and just go through all the exhibitions in the museum at this time are neon as an art material, because it was in Bruce Nauman, it was a little bit in Black Power, I think, and also in the permanent collection, but also Piet Mondrian, because his works were very inspiring to Dutch designers and artists at the time, and they inspired the chair, which is displayed in the permanent collection. It's a very famous piece of furniture. Some Mondrian works also hang near it so that you can compare it. And that would be it when it comes to the Stedelijk Museum. Great experience, I truly recommend it, and just its fame, I guess, and the good things that I heard about this collection was what led me to choosing this as my starting point. Second museum that I visited was Rembrandts House. I read it Rembrandts Huis because that's how I would read it in Polish, but it's Rembrandts House and it is his house. And that is a good museum to visit if you're not a lover of art, but you're also interested a little bit in it and in the history as well, because this is not a museum dedicated to Rembrandt's artworks, but to him as a person and to, well, his house. And speaking of good organization, so this museum is very easy to navigate because it's just a house and there's also only one possible route. But also, to make it even easier, they offer you an audio guide included with the price of the ticket that you're free to take, and the audio guide just tells you to go from room to room and from object to object. The museum is very authentically reconstructed because Rembrandt did a lot of sketches, and the placement of most of the furniture is authentic to the time that he lived there because it's reconstructed from his sketches. My favorite thing about this house and in general that time period are those box beds with doors. I was not that even interested in the art because I was just fascinated with those box beds. I spent a lot of time looking at. Never mind. But speaking of art, I don't remember how many pieces by Rembrandt are there, like 2, maybe 3. Most of the works exhibited there are by his students and also other artists, but it makes sense because Rembrandt was, apart from being a great artist, also a great salesman and a great teacher. So when he taught his students, he taught them to paint in his style, and because of that there were at different points of history little problems with attributing his works to him or to his students, but now we're mostly certain. In general, watching his students work is a good cross-section of his style because they were taught to emulate it. And also you can just see what kind of taste he had in art, because he did not sell other artists' artwork if he did not like it, right? And he sold Dutch artists, but also artists from different countries as well. He was a very entrepreneurial, very business savvy man. Apart from works made in his time, there were also, I think, 5 or less pieces made by black artists during Rembrandts House open studio. It was an event that took place during the quarantine. I think they were just let into the house into the studio area to paint their own works, and most of them were unrelated to Rembrandt in any way. One was sort of a photographic recreation of a painting of 2 black men that he did. I don't think I have a picture of that particular thing. And also I want to mention that there was an intriguing part, because people contemporary to Rembrandt were hoarders if they could afford it. The only discovered continents at the time were Europe, Asia, and Africa, and collecting different souvenirs from the trips that you could not go on was very common. For example, seashells were a very cheap thing that people used to collect, but Rembrandt was quite a rich man, so he collected all this trash. Just like, rest in peace to all the animals who contributed to that, but he collected, for example, just dried reptiles, or reptiles in those jars of whatever preservative they had at the time, tortoise shells, different African swords or shields as well. And we have a very clear picture of what he owned, because he had an inventory of it. So you go into his trash house, his collection room, and you can see, not the actual pieces, but like newer examples of the things that he used to own. But my brain almost exploded when I saw this basket made out of a hollowed armadillo shell, and it was just like wrapped into a bag with his like scales from his head holding the tail. It was disgusting and very grotesque. Most of this trash, justification for this trash was that he used to paint it. So I can just imagine him going into the studio where all his students stood, and he was like, "Guys, you won't believe what I got." And the students are like, "Oh my god, what the fuck? What now, Rembrandt?" And he's like, "I got this," and he shows them this basket made out of an armadillo. Never mind, that might not be interesting. That's half of the museum, the house proper. The other half is just a space that they have to occupy with something, and I really love the exhibition that they had. The exhibition in this other part of the Rembrandts house was about Hansken, an Asian female elephant who was the only elephant in Europe at that time. So it's, to me, fascinating, but this is one of the exhibitions which are controversial, because I think some people would find it a stretch, the things that were exhibited in that exhibition. To me, it made sense, and I liked it, and I was also moved by her story. So, the only elephant in Europe at the time. The things that were exhibited there were different sketches, of course a lot of them by Rembrandt and his students, but also by different artists who were working at the time. But they also had works which had to have been made on the basis of those previous sketches, because after Hansken there was no other elephant in Denmark for quite a while. So she was the only source, the only point of reference for elephants for a long time in the artists there. There were also sketches of places where she lived, even if they were not made there when she lived there. And in general, her lifetime and the places that she visited were kind of a theme as you went down in this part of the museum. It was also interesting to me that whenever a map was made with an elephant in a corner at the time, it's obvious that it was made on her. I don't know whether I'm selling it very well, but to me it was interesting and fascinating, and her history was sad, because later we can see how her health declined, how her stomach was distended because she ate only bread, and how her nails were too long. it's a sad exhibition, but a very interesting one to me. And with that, I'll move on to day 2 of my trip, which starts at Rijksmuseum. And I'm sorry to say, but there's no way for me to spin this particular museum experience as positive. I was miserable. I was miserable, and I will tell you why, so that you can avoid that mistake. Rijksmuseum, whose map I have here, is a giant museum whose collection spans from 1100s to now in general. There are 4 floors, the ground floors and 3 more floors, each dedicated to a different time period here. It looks lovely, it looks organized, because clearly the ground floor are special collections and also 1100 to 1600s. Then it's, you can see that. And you would think it's well organized. I hope you kind of got the theme that was in the background of the 2 previous museums, both in the Black Power exhibition in Stedelijk and in the open house studio Rembrandts House days, where black artists were asked to draw there and then their works were exhibited. In general, the Holland's colonialist history is something on the forefront of the Dutch mind, I guess, right now. And I am not here to say that it is in any way bad, but the way that it was brought into this museum is not great, and I'll get to it. But first, let me get into the spatial organization. So it is a nightmare to navigate this museum. There is no path on the floor. There is no one way to efficiently circulate the museum and perceive it. And also, when you get this map, it's impossible to orient it in terrain because this is a mirror image of the museum. So just navigating is a nightmare. And if you see, the first floor is split into the blue and red section. You cannot just circle the room because there is no going from the blue to red section without going up to floor 2, and also because there is no clear path on the floor. It's just a nightmare to navigate. I'll go get back to it later when we go to the 4th museum. In general, I got lost so many times and so frustrated because I wanted to see as much as I could. Stedelijk is a museum for 3 hours, an hour and a half if you just go for the permanent collection. Rembrandts House is a 2-hour museum. Stedelijk is like 3 to 5 hours museum, but I'm very sad to say that out of the 4.5 hours I spent there, an hour and a half was spent in frustration, just running around like a headless chicken, trying to just see things in a manner that made sense. I am very frustrated and angry, can you tell? So yeah, just space was organized poorly. But also, I mentioned the theme of colonialism and slavery. The whole museum has, I'd say, a filter of this colonialist context. And by that I mean that alongside, let's say, every 10th, 8th artwork, there is a plaque which gives the work a colonialist context. So, for example, if you see, let's say, a picture of a palace, if the owner of the palace had plantations, there is a context about plantations and how he was involved in plantations. If it's a portrait of a ruler, it is mentioned how he refused to sign a document that would have granted the slaves their freedom. And if it was, for example, a still life picture with just some pepper sprinkled on it, it said how the pepper was a product of colonialism and slavery as well. And in general, I don't think it's something that should be hidden, but I said that this museum is poorly organized when it comes to the space. The fact that no artwork was moved so that the context made sense made this also just seem a little bit haphazard, hasty, disrespectful. How can I explain it? The rooms were organized by the context, for example, still lives by still lives, and also by time period, so that the colonialist plaques were disconnected from each other and, to be honest, frankly, from the rooms that they were in. I think they should have just made a gallery of all the works whose context had some colonialist implication, because just arranging or not arranging the works that way puts the onus for getting the historical context on the viewer, who's already lost and frustrated, and I want to be educated. So I would appreciate some help in it, not like logs being thrown under my feet, which makes it just so difficult to grasp the broader picture of this context. Because I don't know, like, for example, they could have done a room where there were still lives with products which were imported from plantations and made, for example, by enslaved people. So it would make sense and give it context. There was nothing like that. So, okay, but wrapping things up, positives. The collection is vast, it is beautiful. The night watch is on display for the first time in a long time, because it was in reconstruction. There was some AI and some historical research involved, because the night watch was cut to fit a different frame a little bit. So now you can see it in its original form, just extended by like 40 centimeters on one side and like 20 centimeters on the bottom. It's important for art critics because it displaces the center of the picture a little bit, just tilts it a little bit when it comes to just like weight distribution of figures on the picture. But I just should have gone to this gallery on second floor and spent my time there. The Milkmaid by Vermeer is on display as well. My favorite artworks, though, displayed were the still lifes by Hedda. I found them, after all this noise, literal and figurative, of the museum, just spending time in front of those still natures evoked the emotions that I was supposed to be feeling, because they have those vanitative, in general, like those memento mori themes in them. Because, for example, a peeled lemon is supposed to evoke just like a passage of time. You're supposed to contemplate how things displayed on this picture have already died because they were fresh at the time and they no longer are. And in general, it's not always the goal of still life. Sometimes they are to display abundance, but Dutch still lifes are supposed to make you feel something. So I just found solace in watching them. I did, until I found the pepper context, which took me out of it, because instead of the context of the artworks, I was brought into the context of the colonialism, which was kind of jarring, and you know what I mean. It's not that I didn't want to learn, but I think it was done poorly. So sorry. Yeah, I don't recommend doing Rijks the way that I did. I recommend choosing the time period, so like the floors that you're interested in, and going to just see those and spend time contemplating them. Yeah, that's my recommendation for the Rijksmuseum. And the last museum that I visited was a little bit soured by the previous experience. It was the Van Gogh Museum. And Van Gogh, I'll say it the Polish way, Van Gogh Museum. And I love Van Gogh. His works are just so beautiful to me. And I'm getting weepy right now, but his life is very inspirational. You can watch a lot of very recent productions about it. You can see the Polish animation of, I think, Love Vincent is the title. You can watch the film with Willem Dafoe as Van Gogh. I've seen both of them lately, and in general, I don't know, his works speak to me. I think just because they are so beautiful. But the museum also was very poorly organized. It was organized good by room, because the rooms were dedicated to different time periods. and the time periods mean specific things for his. So for example, when he was in the psychiatric hospital, he drew the things in the garden of that hospital, and he was also very rooted in reality. He did not really make things up, he just portrayed the things that he saw in his specific art style, which is pretty cool. And I think people really appreciate that, because while his works evoke certain emotions and they are visually so beautiful, they all display specific things that he has already seen, and this realism, I think, is part of what makes him so good, and which speaks to people so much. My favorite work of his, I think, would be the bedroom, which I could see there, and it was a good time. I just decided not to read the facts and not to get into the history of his life, because I already know it by heart, so I just watched the works. Another, I'm afraid, negative is that because of the fact that the museum has a glass roof, there are some lighting issues. The museum is very dark. Also, just the way that it's built, they cannot put more lamps in their rooms, because then they would reflect in the glass cases in front of the paintings, so they cannot afford to put in more light, and it gets a little bit tiring. So probably if you go when it's very sunny out, it's a better experience. It was quite clouded and gloomy outside when I visited, so it was a bit frustrating because it was so dark. But the collection of his work is huge, and I don't know, it was emotionally significant to me. The museum is mediocre when it comes to organization. It's amazing when it comes to the collection, and quite good when it comes to the theming of the rooms. Yeah, that's it. With that, I'll go into this segment, which is the cons of going to Amsterdam. First and foremost, it's this organization in general. Directions are difficult to come by, both in the museums and in general in the city. I think it's difficult to navigate. I have a list of things. Second thing is difficulty with payment. There are places which accept only cash, and it's not that bad, but there are places and sites online which only accept, for example, Dutch banking or just the Maestro card for whatever reason. So paying in the Netherlands is pretty complicated. I use the Revolut app and card, and it made paying possible in multiple places, but sometimes I had to use cash and sometimes it would not have been possible, but there are always ways around it. Just paying, not that easy in this very civilized place. And for the last con, I'd say it would be that the public transport is very expensive. So yeah, that's just a con, right? Just like the expensiveness of public transit, which you have to use if you want to travel like further away from the center. But when it comes to the pros, all important museums are close side by side, so you can easily get everywhere on foot if you're physically able to. They are really, really close. Stedelijk, Van Gogh and Rijks are within like 2 minutes of each other. Rembrandts House is like 15 minutes from them, so really everything is close by. But cheap accommodations would be further away. And speaking of that, I'll give you some tips for saving. First of all, don't go now, because the country changed its status from yellow to red when it comes to the number of cases of coronavirus. The Dutch do not really like the vaccines and masks, so it's quite dire there. I'm just being honest. So maybe wait, and after you wait, I think couch surfing would be most beneficial, and if not that, then around the city, like suburbs, there are cheap hostels, some of them even closer to the city center if you book early enough. Apart from that, if you're there for the weekend and you plan multiple attractions, like at least 3 attractions per day, so let's say 1 museum, 1 bike trip on a rented bike and a gondola, then I would say get an Amsterdam card for a day or 2. It's, I think, 65 euros for a day and 85 euros for 2 days, and most museums and attractions are included in the price. So that's a very good thing if you want to save money. If you plan on staying there, going there for like Erasmus, or just going there for a longer time, and will be living there for a little while, and will get a Dutch address, get a museum card. I'm saying this, for example, if I have a single Erasmus student viewer, then yeah, get a museum card, because it's 65 euros for the whole year. And I got that because I lived with my brother. Another tip would be go to like student forums and go to bars and events recommended there, because they usually know how to save. And in general, my experience with Amsterdam was, one day was good, one day was bad. That's just it. And I'm happier it went that way, because the first day was so good to me. It's just the second day that kind of destroyed me. And that's it. That's all I have to tell y'all. I love art, so I chose specifically art museums. I read Anne Frank diary, I would have gone to the Anne Frank house. Other museums were not really of interest to me, but if you're interested in some other things, you can visit, well, from the outside. I don't think you can go inside the King's Palace, which is the same since a long time. I saw a painting of it in the Rijksmuseum. You can visit the flower market, which is not a huge thing, but it's still a very nice thing to just walk by. It's relatively small but pretty interesting. And in general, just walking through the town is great, because the city is so beautiful. If you find this helpful, or maybe enjoy hanging out with me, consider subscribing or leaving a comment saying what you liked about this video. I would really appreciate it. All my social media I linked in the description box. And to wrap things up, I'll mention why I said that this rainbow will be relevant, because it has to do with a semi-Polish accent that I found in Amsterdam. When we were wandering around the Amsterdam, I was with my brother and his friend. And his friend really wanted to visit some churches, but they were all closed because coronavirus or renovations. In general, many attractions are now closed because of the coronavirus restrictions. They are taking the time to renovate many places. But there was one church which was open, and through the door I saw a poster of a very famous, to us Christian Polish Catholics, or people raised in that religion, painting, which is Matka Boska Częstochowska, or MBC, Mother Mary from Częstochowa, with a rainbow behind her. And I remember that there was a pretty famous case in the last year, I think, where some Polish activists put a rainbow behind her, and they were arrested for the infringement of or disrespecting religious feelings. That's a real offense in my country. And I saw this poster, and I was wondering how come, what is that? And inside I learned that in this church, which was a non-denominational Christian church, this poster was an Amnesty International call to action, so that you can write letters to release those activists from jail, which was the Polish accent for that trip. I don't think it's a very positive way to wrap things up, so what can I tell you that was totally positive?